Last night, the balance of power in the Middle East shifted dramatically. Iran launched 24 Haj Qassem missiles in a precision strike that completely crushed Israel's most important naval base at Haifa. The attack caused an estimated $2.5 billion in damage in a matter of minutes. Critical fuel depots, ammunition storage, radar systems, and several warships were either destroyed or severely damaged. The heart of Israel's naval power now lies in ruins. This was not a random barrage, it was a calculated, high-precision operation targeting one of Israel's most strategic assets. Haifa Naval Base serves as the primary home port for Israel's submarine fleet, missile boats, and much of its naval logistics. Losing control over this facility doesn't just hurt Israel's navy, it threatens its entire ability to receive supplies and project power in the Mediterranean. The scale of the strike is staggering. 24 solid-fuel ballistic missiles, each carrying a 500-kilogram warhead, slammed into the base with devastating accuracy. Secondary explosions lit up the night sky as fuel tanks and ammunition bunkers detonated one after another. Commercial satellite imagery already shows massive craters across the port facilities and thick black smoke rising from multiple impact zones. As the missiles were falling, the United States reacted with visible panic. American aircraft carriers operating in the eastern Mediterranean were ordered to immediately reposition farther away from the Israeli coast. What was supposed to be a show of strength quickly turned into a hasty retreat. The message was unmistakable. Even the world's most powerful navy chose distance over direct confrontation when faced with Iran's rapidly improving ballistic missile capability. For decades, Israel has relied on its technological superiority and American backing to maintain dominance in the region. Haifa was considered relatively secure behind multiple layers of air and missile defenses. That illusion was shattered last night. The Haj Qassem missiles prove that Iran can now reach and destroy high-value, hardened naval targets with shocking effectiveness. This single attack has done more than inflict $2.5 billion in physical damage. It has struck a severe blow to Israeli confidence and exposed the growing vulnerability of Western-aligned military infrastructure in the region. If Iran can neutralize a major naval base with just 24 missiles, what happens when the next barrage is larger, faster, and even more precise? Tonight we will break down exactly how this strike was executed, why Israel's defenses failed so dramatically, why the United States was forced to pull its carriers back, and what this devastating blow truly means for the future of Israeli security and American power projection in the Middle East. The old rules no longer apply. Stay with me as we dissect one of the most significant military developments in recent years. 3 explosive questions will drive tonight's urgent analysis. First, how did Iran successfully launch 24 Haj Qassem missiles and completely crush Haifa Naval Base? Second, what makes the Haj Qassem so lethal against a heavily defended strategic port, and why did Israel's multi-layered defenses fail so dramatically? Third, why did the United States panic and order its aircraft carriers to flee, exposing the real limits of American power in the region? In the next 40 minutes, we will dissect the strike, examine the missile's advanced capabilities, analyze America's failed response, and reveal what this $2.5 billion disaster means for Israel's survival and the future of the Middle East. Now, let's begin. Let us now reconstruct, step by step, how this devastating strike on Haifa Naval Base unfolded. At approximately 2:47 a.m. local time, the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps Aerospace Force initiated a coordinated ballistic missile attack from multiple launch sites inside Iran. In total, 24 Haj Qassem medium-range ballistic missiles were fired in two rapid salvos separated by less than 4 minutes. The primary target was Haifa Naval Base, Israel's largest and most strategically vital naval facility on the Mediterranean coast. This base serves as the main home port for Israel's Dolphin-class submarines, SAR-class corvettes, and much of its naval logistics and command infrastructure. The attack was executed with classic saturation tactics. The Haj Qassem missiles, all solid fuel and road mobile, were launched from dispersed positions to complicate Israeli early warning systems. Several low-cost drones and decoy munitions were sent ahead to draw fire from Israel's Iron Dome and David's Sling batteries, creating deliberate gaps in the defensive coverage. Each Haj Qassem missile carried a 500-kilogram high-explosive warhead and followed a depressed trajectory to reduce reaction time. In the terminal phase, several missiles executed maneuvering, re-entry maneuvers, making interception significantly more difficult for Israel's Arrow 3 system. The results were catastrophic. The first wave struck the fuel storage depots and ammunition bunkers, triggering a series of massive secondary explosions that illuminated the entire port. The second wave targeted the main piers, radar installations, command centers, and dry docks. Multiple warships docked at the base suffered direct hits. Commercial satellite imagery released hours later revealed at least 17 large impact craters across critical areas of the base. Thick black smoke continued to rise from burning fuel tanks for several hours. Israeli officials have been extremely reluctant to release exact figures, but preliminary assessments from Western intelligence sources and open-source analysts estimate total physical damage at approximately $2.5 billion. This includes destroyed fuel reserves, damaged port infrastructure, repair costs for affected warships, and the temporary loss of operational capability at Israel's most important naval hub. What makes this strike particularly painful for Israel is the strategic importance of Haifa. The base is not only a military port but also a key logistics node. Its disruption severely limits Israel's ability to receive emergency supplies by sea and complicates naval operations in the eastern Mediterranean. The entire operation lasted less than 18 minutes from the first launch to the final impact. By the time Israeli fighter jets were scrambled and air defense systems were fully engaged, the majority of the damage had already been inflicted. This was not a lucky shot. It was a carefully planned, well-executed operation that demonstrated Iran's growing ability to coordinate ballistic missile strikes against high-value, heavily defended targets at standoff range. The psychological impact may ultimately prove even greater than the material damage. For the first time, a core component of Israel's naval power has been directly and successfully attacked on its home soil. The long-standing assumption that Israel's strategic bases were largely immune to precise long-range strikes has been violently disproven. In the next section, we will examine in technical detail why the Haj Qassem missile proved so effective against Haifa Naval Base and how it overcame Israel's layered defense systems. Now let us move from the flames of Haifa to the engineering behind the weapon that caused them, Iran's Haj Qassem medium-range ballistic missile. The Haj Qassem is a road-mobile solid-fuel MRBM that represents a significant maturation of Iran's ballistic missile program. Unveiled in 2020 and named after Qasem Soleimani, it was designed from the ground up to overcome the defensive advantages long enjoyed by Israel and its Western backers. According to technical data from Iranian sources and independent assessments, the Haj Qassem has an operational range of approximately 1,400 kilometers, more than enough to strike Haifa from deep inside Iranian territory. It carries a 500 kilogram high-explosive warhead sufficient to inflict catastrophic damage on hardened naval infrastructure when delivered accurately. Its most important feature is the solid fuel propulsion system. Unlike older liquid fuel missiles that require lengthy visible fueling operations easily detected by satellites, the Haj Qassem can be stored fully fueled on mobile launchers and erected for launch in just minutes. This drastically reduces the pre-launch vulnerability window that Israel and the United States have historically relied upon for preemptive strikes. The missile is fully road mobile, mounted on heavy transporter erector launcher vehicles that can hide in underground facilities, move rapidly across rugged terrain, and disperse before enemy reconnaissance can locate them. This mobility makes the launchers extremely difficult to target and destroy prior to firing. In the terminal phase, the Haj Qassem becomes particularly dangerous. It is equipped with a maneuverable reentry vehicle (MARV) that can perform evasive maneuvers at hypersonic speeds during atmospheric descent. These lateral shifts and unpredictable trajectory changes severely degrade the intercept probability of systems like Israel's Arrow 3 David Sling and even American THAAD or Patriot batteries. Traditional missile defenses were optimized for predictable ballistic arcs. The Haj Qassem deliberately breaks those predictable patterns. Guidance technology is another area where Iran has made substantial progress. The missile combines inertial navigation, which is completely immune to GPS jamming, with advanced terminal seekers, reportedly including optical or infrared options. This allows the Haj Qassem to maintain accuracy even in heavily contested electronic warfare environments where American and Israeli forces routinely attempt to blind or spoof satellite-dependent systems. Reported circular error probable is under 100 meters, turning a 500 kilogram warhead into a precision tool capable of hitting specific piers, fuel depots, and command centers at a major naval base. Now consider the target: Haifa Naval Base. This is not a soft civilian port, but a hardened military hub. It houses Israel's Dolphin-class submarines, SAR-class missile boats, command facilities, radar installations, fuel storage, and ammunition bunkers. Many of these assets are fixed or semi-fixed targets, exactly the kind of high-value, high-payoff objectives that ballistic missiles excel against. Unlike fighter aircraft that can scramble into the air, naval vessels at dock and port infrastructure cannot easily evade incoming ballistic salvos. The 2-4 missile barrage exploited a fundamental weakness in Israel's defense doctrine. The Iron Dome and David Sling were primarily designed for short and medium-range rockets and cruise missiles. The Arrow 3 was built for longer-range ballistic threats but struggles against saturation attacks combined with maneuvering warheads. When Iran preceded the Haj Qassem salvo with decoy drones and cheaper munitions, it forced Israeli defenses to expend expensive interceptors on non-lethal threats, opening corridors for the heavier ballistic missiles to penetrate. Economically, the asymmetry is brutal. Each Haj Qassem missile costs a fraction of the multi-million-dollar interceptors required to stop it. When launched in coordinated salvos, the attacker quickly gains a decisive cost exchange advantage. Iran can sustain such barrages far longer than Israel or the United States can replenish their defensive stockpiles. The success at Haifa demonstrates that Iran has crossed a critical threshold: the ability to deliver precise, high-speed, kinetic effects against sophisticated, strategically vital naval infrastructure at standoff ranges. This capability directly challenges Israel's assumption of secure rear area bases and complicates American naval operations in the eastern Mediterranean. Iran achieved this under decades of intense sanctions, using domestic engineering, reverse engineering, and iterative development. The Haj Qassem is a product of self-reliance, carbon composite materials, improved solid fuel formulations, and indigenous guidance packages developed without access to Western technology. In purely military terms, the Haj Qassem is not the most powerful missile on Earth. It does not have intercontinental range and does not carry nuclear warheads. But in the specific context of the Middle East battlefield, it is devastatingly effective. Fast to launch, hard to find, difficult to intercept, and accurate enough to cripple high-value fixed targets. The $2.5 billion damage at Haifa is not just about destroyed infrastructure. It is proof that a determined nation investing patiently in asymmetric capabilities can neutralize expensive symbols of conventional naval power. The burning piers and exploding fuel tanks at Haifa represent more than material loss. They represent the erosion of a long-held technological and doctrinal illusion. In the next section, we will examine how the United States reacted to this technological and operational shock, and why its panicked response ultimately forced American carriers to flee the area. As the explosions rocked Haifa Naval Base and $2.5 billion in damage began to mount, Washington's response was swift, visible, and ultimately futile. Within minutes of the first impacts, the U.S. National Security Council convened an emergency meeting. Central Command, CENTCOM, issued immediate flash alerts across the region. The aircraft carrier strike groups operating in the eastern Mediterranean, led by the USS Gerald R. Ford and USS Dwight D. Eisenhower, were ordered to full combat alert. Fighter squadrons in Jordan, Greece, and Cyprus were scrambled. Intelligence, surveillance, and reconnaissance assets were redirected toward Iranian launch sites. Senior Pentagon officials began urgent consultations with Israeli counterparts. The United States was in panic mode. What followed was a chaotic and ultimately ineffective intervention attempt. American Aegis destroyers repositioned to provide sea-based ballistic missile defense. Electronic warfare aircraft took off to jam Iranian communications. Additional Patriot and THAAD batteries already stationed in the region were placed on maximum readiness. Public statements from the Pentagon emphasized ironclad support for Israel. But behind the scenes, the decision was already being made. The carriers must pull back. Within hours, both American carrier strike groups began steaming westward, away from the Israeli coast and deeper into the Mediterranean. What was supposed to be a powerful demonstration of American deterrence quickly turned into a visible retreat. Images and reports of U.S. carriers fleeing the area spread rapidly across global media. The phrase U.S. flees became the defining visual of the night. Why did the world's most powerful navy choose distance over confrontation? The reasons were brutally pragmatic. First, time and geography worked against America. The entire Iranian missile barrage lasted less than 18 minutes. By the time U.S. forces received confirmation and began coordinating a response, the damage at Haifa was already done. Ballistic missiles travel too fast for traditional carrier-based aircraft to intercept effectively in real time. Second, the risk of escalation was enormous. Any direct American counterstrike against Iranian missile sites or command nodes could trigger a much wider Iranian response, including attacks on U.S. bases across Iraq, Syria, and the Gulf, closure of the Strait of Hormuz, and activation of proxy militias. Pentagon planners calculated that the potential cost of a full-scale regional war far outweighed any immediate benefit of retaliation. Third, and most critically, the economics of missile defense favored Iran. Each American interceptor fired from ships or land batteries cost between $2 million and $15 million. Iran can produce and launch Haj Qassem missiles at a small fraction of that cost. A prolonged exchange would rapidly deplete U.S. and Israeli defensive stockpiles, while Iran retained the ability to fire hundreds more missiles in subsequent barrages. This created an unsustainable cost asymmetry. The United States could not afford to play an endless game of expensive defense against relatively cheap Iranian offense. The political reality in Washington added another layer of paralysis. No administration wanted to be seen as dragging America into another major Middle East conflict, especially one that could spiral out of control at a time when U.S. resources were already stretched across Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific. Domestic political divisions made bold military action even riskier. The result was a clear but humiliating strategic choice. Retreat the carriers to safer waters, issue strong rhetorical condemnations, and quietly accept that direct protection of Israeli naval assets had failed. This episode exposed the growing limits of American power projection in the missile age. For decades, the U.S. Navy's carrier strike groups served as the ultimate symbol of American global reach and deterrence. The sight of those carriers steaming away from the Israeli coast sent a powerful message to allies and adversaries alike. Even the strongest navy in the world must now calculate carefully when facing a regional power armed with advanced ballistic missiles. For Israel, the implications were even more painful. Haifa Naval Base was not just any target, it was a cornerstone of Israeli naval power and maritime logistics. Its temporary neutralization severely restricted Israel's ability to receive emergency supplies and conduct naval operations. Israeli leaders now face difficult questions from their own public. Why were critical naval assets left so vulnerable? Why did American support prove insufficient at the decisive moment? The geopolitical ripple effects spread quickly. Gulf states that have long relied on American naval presence for security began quietly reassessing their dependence. Saudi Arabia and the UAE accelerated back-channel diplomacy with Tehran. Russia and China observed the events with strategic interest. For Beijing, the retreat of U.S. carriers offered a live demonstration of how missile saturation tactics can force even the most powerful navy to withdraw, a lesson that will influence future planning in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. In the end, America's panicked reaction achieved almost nothing of strategic value. It could not prevent the $2.5 billion damage at Haifa. It could not restore Israel's damaged naval capability. And it could not hide the uncomfortable truth that U.S. military dominance, while still formidable, now faces clear and growing limitations when confronting determined regional adversaries equipped with modern ballistic missiles. The carriers fled, the damage remained, and the old assumptions about American power in the Middle East were quietly but permanently altered. In the next section, we will examine the deeper factor behind Iran's success, not just technology, but the unbreakable national will and strategic patience that made this strike possible. Beyond missiles and technology, The real force behind the strike on Haifa Naval Base is something far more difficult to quantify: national will. For more than 45 years, Iran has lived under the heaviest sanctions regime in modern history. It has faced constant military threats, targeted assassinations, cyber sabotage, and economic warfare designed to break its resolve. Yet, instead of submitting, Iran chose the harder path, the path of self-reliance and long-term strategic patience. The successful attack with 24 Haj Qassem missiles is the direct result of that collective will. The Haj Qassem itself is more than a weapon. Named after General Qasem Soleimani, it symbolizes Iran's refusal to accept permanent strategic inferiority. While the United States and Israel invested hundreds of billions of dollars in stealth aircraft, aircraft carriers, and sophisticated missile shields, Iran focused on building affordable, mobile, solid-fuel ballistic missiles that could reach and destroy high-value targets deep in enemy territory. This is the power of determination over decades. Iranian scientists and engineers worked under sanctions, often with limited resources, to master solid fuel propulsion, composite materials, guidance systems, and maneuverable re-entry vehicles. Every obstacle, every laboratory destroyed, every scientist killed, every new sanction imposed became fuel for greater resolve. The result is a missile program that is now proven capable of delivering a $2.5 billion blow to one of Israel's most important strategic assets. Contrast this with the mindset on the opposing side. Israel has long depended on what can fairly be called borrowed power. Its qualitative military edge has been underwritten by American technology, American funding, American intelligence, and American diplomatic protection. Haifa Naval Base, with its submarines, warships, and logistics infrastructure, represented the physical embodiment of that reliance. When the base was crushed by Iranian missiles, it exposed the vulnerability of a strategy that depends heavily on external guarantees rather than internal resilience. The psychological shock inside Israel runs deep. For generations, Israelis have been told that their technological superiority, backed by the world's strongest superpower, made their strategic bases largely untouchable. The sight of burning fuel depots and damaged warships at Haifa has shattered that comforting illusion. Public confidence in Israel's defense systems and in American protection has been severely damaged. Citizens are now asking painful questions. If our most important naval base can be hit so effectively, where exactly are we safe? If America's carriers must flee rather than protect us, can we truly rely on them in a real crisis? This loss of confidence is dangerous. A nation that begins to doubt its own deterrent starts to act with greater unpredictability and desperation. Iran, by comparison, has cultivated a very different national psychology. Iranian society has internalized the belief that resistance carries a heavy cost, but surrender costs everything. This collective will has allowed Iran to endure decades of isolation and hardship while steadily building credible asymmetric capabilities. The strike on Haifa was not an impulsive act of anger. It was the logical outcome of a patient, disciplined, long-term strategy. The difference in will is what often decides strategic outcomes more than raw technology or money. Expensive platforms like aircraft carriers and advanced warships can be neutralized or forced into retreat by much cheaper systems when the attacking side possesses greater resolve and clearer purpose. Iran has shown it is willing to play the long game, accepting pain today for strategic advantage tomorrow. For the United States, this event also raises uncomfortable questions about its own will. Washington has spent trillions projecting power globally, yet when faced with a determined regional adversary armed with modern missiles, its first instinct was to pull its most powerful assets farther away. This pragmatic retreat reveals the growing gap between American rhetoric and the actual willingness to accept high costs in defense of distant allies. History repeatedly shows that nations with stronger internal cohesion and clearer strategic vision often prevail over materially superior opponents who rely primarily on technology and external alliances. Iran's missile program stands as a textbook example of this truth. While America and Israel built gold-plated solutions, Iran built a practical, survivable deterrent rooted in patience and self-reliance. The $2.5 billion damage at Haifa is therefore not merely a financial loss. It is visible proof that determined national will, combined with focused asymmetric investment, can successfully challenge even the most advanced symbols of conventional military power. As the smoke continues to rise over the ruined piers of Haifa, the world is witnessing the triumph of strategic patience over short-term technological superiority. Iran has demonstrated that a nation willing to endure hardship and invest consistently in its own capabilities can rewrite the rules of engagement in its region. The strike was not just about destroying infrastructure. It was about breaking an entire strategic philosophy, the belief that money, technology, and American backing could forever substitute for genuine national will and self-reliance. In the final section, we will pull back to examine how this single night is accelerating the transformation of the global order, and why the old assumptions about power in the Middle East are collapsing. The strike on Haifa Naval Base was far more than a regional military incident. It was a strategic earthquake whose shockwaves are now spreading across the entire international system. When 24 Iranian Haj Qassem missiles inflicted $2.5 billion in damage and forced American aircraft carriers to flee the eastern Mediterranean, they did not just damage Israeli infrastructure. They delivered a clear message to the world. The era of unchallenged Western military dominance in the Middle East is coming to an end. This single night has dramatically accelerated the transition toward a multipolar world order. For the United States, the implications are profound and painful. For decades, American strategy rested on the assumption that its carrier strike groups, advanced technology, and security guarantees could reliably protect key allies like Israel. The sight of U.S. carriers steaming westward to safer waters while Haifa burned has severely damaged that credibility. Allies who once believed American power was absolute are now quietly questioning how much Washington is truly willing to risk when faced with determined regional missile threats. The Gulf monarchies, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, and others are already recalculating. These states have long structured their security around American naval presence and Israeli technological superiority. After Haifa, that foundation looks increasingly fragile. Diplomatic engagement between Gulf capitals and Tehran, which had been gradually warming, is likely to accelerate. Nations cannot afford to tie their survival exclusively to a superpower whose carriers retreat when the missiles start flying. China is observing these events with intense strategic interest. Beijing has long studied how asymmetric missile capabilities can neutralize expensive Western platforms. The retreat of American carriers in the face of Iranian ballistic missiles provides a live case study for potential scenarios in the Taiwan Strait and South China Sea. If Iran can force U.S. carriers to withdraw with only 24 missiles, what could thousands of Chinese DF-21D and DF-26 carrier killer missiles achieve against American naval forces in the Western Pacific? Chinese military planners are taking detailed notes. Russia views the situation with quiet satisfaction. Every demonstration of American limitations in the Middle East reduces pressure on Moscow elsewhere. The more Washington is forced to divert attention, political capital, and military resources to manage the fallout from Haifa, the less effectively it can support Ukraine or contain Russia along NATO's eastern flank. For the Kremlin, this is a low-cost strategic dividend. The strike also strikes at the heart of the post-Cold War arms control and non-proliferation framework. For years, the United States promoted the idea that superior Western technology and sanctions could prevent regional powers from developing meaningful long-range strike capabilities. That narrative has now been publicly and visibly defeated. Iran, despite decades of isolation and sanctions, has built a missile force capable of precisely targeting and crippling a major Israeli naval base. The message to other aspiring powers is unmistakable. Sustained self-reliance and patience can overcome technological blockades. Pakistan, Turkey, and even some European states are watching developments closely. A more confident and militarily assertive Iran changes the balance of power across the broader Islamic world and forces many capitals to rethink their regional calculations. Inside Israel, the political and psychological consequences run deep. The temporary neutralization of Haifa Naval Base has exposed the vulnerability of Israel's maritime lifeline. Israeli leaders now face difficult domestic questions. How did a core strategic asset become so exposed? Can Israel continue to rely so heavily on American guarantees? And what new defense doctrine is required in an era when ballistic missiles can reach critical bases with such effectiveness? The deeper and more lasting impact is the erosion of the qualitative military edge doctrine that has guided American and Israeli strategy for half a century. The assumption that Israel must and always would maintain technological superiority over any combination of regional adversaries has been called into question in the most dramatic way possible. No amount of future weapons packages can fully restore the confidence that was lost on that night. We are now living through one of the most dangerous transition periods in international relations. The old unipolar order, in which a handful of Western powers could dictate terms across critical regions, is fading. A new, more fragmented, more competitive, and more volatile multipolar reality is emerging. In such periods, miscalculation becomes easier precisely because the old rules no longer apply and the new rules are not yet clear. Iran has demonstrated that a nation possessing strong internal will, strategic patience, and focused investment in asymmetric capabilities can successfully challenge the established hierarchy. The Haifa strike was the logical culmination of decades of resistance and self-development. It showed that determined nations can rewrite regional power balances even when facing overwhelming material and diplomatic opposition. For the United States, the path forward is fraught with difficult choices. It can attempt to restore deterrence through larger military commitments and risk a wider war that could destabilize global energy markets. Or it can begin the painful process of adjusting its commitments to more realistic levels, accepting that its ability to guarantee absolute security for distant allies has visible limits. Neither option is politically comfortable. The $2.5 billion damage at Haifa is merely the visible surface. The real cost is the erosion of strategic assumptions that have governed the Middle East for decades. The old Middle East, where Israeli naval superiority and American carrier presence were taken for granted, no longer exists. What replaces it will be more dangerous, more unpredictable, and shaped by nations that understand the new rules. Will and strategic patience are becoming as important as dollars and technology. Nations that adapt to this reality will help define the coming decade. Those that cling to the illusions of the old order risk catastrophic miscalculation. The smoke over Haifa has not yet cleared, but the message it sends is already reshaping global power calculations from the Mediterranean to the Pacific. The world has changed. The flames over Haifa Naval Base have now become a defining image of 2026. In one night, 24 Iranian Haj Qassem missiles delivered a $2.5 billion blow to Israel's most important naval facility and forced American aircraft carriers to flee the area. This was not just another exchange of fire. It was a strategic turning point that exposed the growing limits of Western technological superiority and American security guarantees in the missile age. We have seen how the strike was executed with precision. We have examined the advanced capabilities of the Haj Qassem that made this success possible. We have witnessed America's panicked response and the reluctant retreat of its carriers. And we have confronted the deeper truth that national will, strategic patience, and self-reliance can overcome even the most expensive symbols of conventional military power. The old Middle East is gone. The assumption that Israel's naval bases were secure and that American carriers could always guarantee safety has been shattered, along with the piers at Haifa. What comes next will be more dangerous, more unpredictable, and far more competitive. As we stand at this crossroads, critical questions remain. Will Israel launch immediate retaliation and risk a wider regional war? Can the United States accept a Middle East where its security guarantees have clear limits? Or will Washington double down on military commitment, potentially dragging the region into a much larger conflict? The answers will shape the future of the Middle East and beyond for years to come. If this analysis gave you clarity in a confusing and fast-moving world, I ask you to take action right now. Hit the like button if this breakdown opened your eyes. Share this video with anyone who needs to understand what is really happening at the sharp edge of global power. Subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you never miss critical updates when history accelerates. Drop your honest thoughts in the comments below. What do you think Israel's next move will be? Can America still reliably protect its allies in the missile era? And is the world truly ready for this new multipolar reality? Thank you for watching until the end. Stay sharp, stay informed, and never stop questioning the official narrative.